Welcome to the 775 Alive, a podcast focusing on rural Nevada. I am Crystal Newton.
And I'm Scott Gavorski.
Today, we're talking about the big, beautiful bill. But first, we should talk about Nevada. They finally wrapped up their legislative session.
Yes, they did.
If you remember, Nevada is only in session once every 2 years because we're weird like that. I don't know. We should be on an annual schedule at this point, don't you think?
Yeah, I think there's an argument for that. There's going to be a lot of people going back and forth. But yeah, so it's wrapped up. We're going to have a wrap-up episode here shortly because I think there's a lot to talk about. Our governor yet set another record with vetoes, 87 of them this time around.
Yeah, that pen's smoking hot.
Right. So let's get back. The big, beautiful bill has been attracting a lot of attention now that the legislature has gone out. Very much like the Las Vegas area, we're in a situation where we have a significant portion of the population that works in the service and entertainment industry.
Yes, tips. Yes, part of the big, beautiful bill, no tax on tips. It's looking like that's going to pass with flying colors, which is very exciting. And maybe we could even win over some of those Clark County voters. Well, I don't know. That's a pretty nice little handout there.
It could be. And of course, President Trump has sort of set a deadline or what he would like to see this passed by July 4th. Right?
Yes.
Right now, it's passed the House. Pretty much party line vote. There were some defections on either side. But now it's with the Senate, and that's really where the debates are going on right now as we speak. Now, of course, the centerpiece I think we could start with talking about the bill is actually the extension of the 2017 tax cuts.
Yes, that is a very big deal, and especially following up the tariffs that Trump implemented, we saw a huge shakeup in the bond market, which is the base level financial market that supports the economy of the United States. Right. So we really want to see that market get some assurances and get confident again so that people will start investing in America. And the one thing you do as a lender when you look at lending someone money is you look at the income. Right. And so passing those tax cuts will really show lenders that we have a certain amount of income you can rely on. This is how we're going to operate for the foreseeable future and hopefully get more investors on board with this new revolution going on in America.
Right. And that one of the things we saw about this that had been so interesting talking about income was, like always, there was a report out of the Congressional Budgeting Office, the CBO, about the bill. And like most of these come through, this budget's non-sustainable. If we don't have the taxes, we're gonna be out of money soon, have to borrow more money, which I guess you want to talk about Rand Paul here in a minute is going on
about
that.
I've heard that a few times in the last few years. Why is that so familiar?
Right. Well, what's interesting about it that I thought was different this time around is I think we had a much larger group of people coming out and saying, now, wait a minute, the CBO is obviously not taking in the other side of the effects of the tax. Yes, it might, if everything else stays the same, it looks like it's reducing the income to the federal government. But what we've consistently seen, and the argument on the Republican side has long been that if you decrease the tax rates, people will take that money and put it to work. So what we've seen, and we saw this definitely after 2017 up until the pandemic recession, was that federal revenues actually increased.
Yeah.
Is that money got plowed back into the economy in more productive ways than just the government.
Yeah, and that in tandem with the trillions of dollars investment that we see lined up, especially in the automotive industry and the transportation sector. There's a lot of things that are picking up, and the federal government, we're at a point in our economy where if the federal government doesn't buy in, then the rest of us don't buy in. So they're kicking off this in the right way. And I know a lot of people are complaining about the spending, but you have to spend money to make money.
Right.
And what you ideally want to do as a country is spend money alongside private investors. And that's exactly how this has been structured. Trump has brought in a bunch of investors. Now we're going to pair that with the government putting in those final dollars. And it's awesome. One thing really strategic about this bill that I think a lot of people maybe are missing is that we are funding the government for quite a ways into the future. And the reason why we want to do that instead of doing a continuing resolution all the time is we may not win in the midterms. And what we don't want to be is in a position where the Democrats have leverage in negotiation. Does that make sense?
Well, my understanding, and I could be wrong about this, that the tax cuts are set not to sundown. Right. So 2017 tax cuts were only supposed to go through the end of this year, this budget year. Now, remember, a large part of the budget they're talking about was supposed to be passed last October.
Yeah.
So we're almost 9 months into it. So whatever spending is going to occur has already occurred through these continuing resolutions. Right. And I have some thoughts about what they're doing on that. But what these seek to do is put those tax cuts in permanently, not the spending issues per se, because those will only be for the year and or shorter periods. Right. But the tax cuts and the basis of generating that revenue would be set into place for a much longer time than we've seen in the past. So in that case, I think there is a strategic element to that.
Yeah, I really see some good foundational pieces being laid with this bill. And I'm actually pretty excited about it and the potential to hold on to the changes. We voted Trump in to do these things. And it is one thing to do them, but to hold on to them. That was one of the things that I had a conversation with the ex-Douglas County chair, Mike, and we were talking about, it's one thing to get all these changes, but to hold on to it is going to be a whole other thing for the Republican Party to try to grapple, So,
and I think it's part of the transition Republicans are going to have to make from being an opposition party to a governing party.
Yeah,
get gains into place and then keep them. But there's some other stuff that goes along with that. So not only sort of restructuring, I think, the budget long term, but there's also been quite a bit of pushback, I think, particularly from the more hardcore MAGA community. I think we can say that the DOGE cuts aren't in.
Yeah.
And that's Rand Paul's a large part of his argument, not so much the DOGE cuts per se, but the spending isn't there.
Yeah. Like I said, you got to spend money to make money. And then there is also that question of whether the DOGE cuts can actually be transacted. I think we're looking for a court ruling on the Impoundment Act to see exactly what kind of money we can pull off the table once Congress has appropriated it.
Well, I think there's 3 or 4 cases right now.
Okay.
But what I would say that's more vital in this discussion is, again, this budget was supposed to have been passed last October. So we've had a continuing resolution after continuing resolution, part of it because they didn't know who was going to be president, right? Which also gets into an interesting point, just like you were talking about, with how these budgets have been subject now for decades to this sort of whiplash effect, right? Depending on who's president. And that's probably something, for any type of long-term policy, we probably should be moving away from that. But that being said, I think one of the things to bear in mind is that even if Trump is allowed to do this empowerment stuff, the truth is a lot of the stuff that the DOGE proposed was stuff that is largely already spent by this point because of where we are in the budgeting process. I do think the Republicans have a plan. And that is, if they can get this off the table, and again, President Trump has set up this July 4th deadline for political reasons. And to be honest, there's nothing wrong with that, right? No. It's not a dirty word to say that. But I do think that there is a strong movement among the congressional leadership that what they want to do is start moving away from these continuing resolutions and these massive bills and go back to the detailed budgeting process. We have 12 separate budget bills coming out of the House and Senate. We've gotten away from that for almost a generation and a half. Part of that is to avoid the filibuster in the Senate. Part of it is because Congress just can't get its act together and get everything done they need to get done on time.
Well, I think it's really important to point out the fact that we cannot cut our way out of our deficit. Our annual budget, federal budget, is $6.8 trillion a year, just shy of $7 trillion. And about $6 trillion of that is stuff that people would have absolute cows over if we cut, like Medicare, defense, Social Security. These are things that we're really can't, there's only like a little bit of shaving, maybe, but we're really not going to be able to cut enough to get out of our deficit. We really have to create new economy, new industry, and new sources of income to pay off this debt. And I know that's a gamble and a lot of people are scared by it, but there is really no way to cut our way out of our deficits.
Probably not 100%. I tend to think that there's far more cutting, and it's not cutting just in sort of slashing programs, right? And in fact, a lot of the programs they've slashed, it's really questionable what the, what the benefits of that's going to be.
Less cutting and more efficiencies, right?
More efficiencies. Yeah. I really think that's where a large part of the problem is within the current budget.
Well, just the fraud alone that was discovered during DOGE, if we could just get these agencies communicating, that could save yourself some money right there. We're not getting defrauded. Hey.
Right. And I think it's worthwhile remembering just as we're not going to fix this overnight. No. It's taken 60 years to get to where we are with the deficit and the debt. So this is not something that's going to be fixed within a single presidential term, let alone a single congressional term. But we can start putting into place where we're paying that down over time. And part of that's going to have to be moving away from a model that everything the federal government does is 100% necessary. It's 100% efficient. And, it's the only solution is to raise taxes, right?
I agree with you, but I mean, devil's advocate, there's a structural issue I've been seeing over and over. And it's something I think about as a business person, is like how I have to change my business depending on what administration is in office. And that's really starting to annoy me as a business person. I have to consider whether it's a Democrat or Republican in the office, especially with the use of executive orders, the way they've been using them. it makes it almost impossible for me to have the same business from administration to administration. And so I see us setting ourselves on that practical course of paying off the debt, and then a Democrat gets in office and then the whole thing gets blown out of the water again. That's the essential issue that we're dealing with now. And I have no idea how to tackle that.
I think this is where we return to a more standard budgeting process.
Oh, yeah, get back to basics, right? Do some Sesame Street here.
Funny considering the target that Sesame Street in Iraq was for Doge, right? But
I got to keep bringing it back.
Yeah, I know.
It's so sensational.
But
little what is it, Elmo?
Elmo, yeah, tickle me Elmo. But no, I think there is a real issue that one of the reasons we're seeing this sort of whiplash effect as administrations have changed is I think there's an argument to be made that the Constitution was actually set up to encourage compromise. That it's really hard to do things without compromising. And in some ways, as much as people don't like it, stuff such as the filibuster is part of it.
Yeah.
And getting away from the budget process, ramming through these bills. I mean, this last budget one that cleared the House in less than 24 hours was 2,000 pages.
Yeah.
2,000. I mean, that's undigestible, right? And we had the same thing going back to the state level.
And how much time did they have to read that?
Oh, it was less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is something you've actually had to deal with here in the Nevada side.
Right.
Like last minute amendments or like, oh, here's a bill. You got 15 minutes to read it. Excuse me?
Right.
What?
And, pushing this through. And a lot of times they get pushed through on party line votes, which a lot of people think are illegitimate. But more importantly, we don't know the consequences, the true consequences. I mean, a great example of this is we were talking about when we were putting this together was, so the House passes this big, beautiful bill. And about a week or so after it passes, Marjorie Taylor Greene, representative from Georgia, actually gives it. Content-wise, the speech was gorgeous about federalism. But what she was concerned about was the AI.
Yes.
That the states or that the federal government was going to set AI policy and prohibited the states from doing so. Yeah. And she gave a very wonderful speech about a topic that we probably need to discuss about federalism and what's the role of the states versus the federal government and the 10th Amendment. It was a beautiful speech.
Yes.
And all anybody could talk to was, you just voted to pass this. Why didn't you say something when it was passed? Well, either A, they didn't have time to read it and think about it, which I think is part of it, or you're just in a situation where I think that sort of push to send a 2,000-page bill in actually ends up limiting discussion and limiting the ability to see what the effects are. And that, in the long term, I think is far more damaging.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that AI component for a second, because it is very interesting. My belief is that the AI part was put in an effort specifically to keep California from setting a national policy, because they tend to, like in the car industry, if they have an emissions standard above and beyond the national one, all the car companies tend to go toward the California policy because it's a bigger market. Most of the AI companies are in California.
Right.
So there's a very real concern that California will start putting stipulations on AI products. And we don't really want California dictating how the AI industry is going to shape out. We really want the federal government in charge of that. So principally, that's where we're at. We're in agreement. I do wonder, though, with the 10th Amendment, states' rights always supersede federal government. So how do we wrangle that?
Well, they don't always.
Okay.
Right. It's that anything, I mean, what the 10th Amendment basically reads is that anything not designated to the federal government remains with the states or to the people.
So by the federal government grabbing ownership of it first, they will take precedence?
No. It's what the 10th Amendment, most people read the 10th Amendment said, okay, so the federal government, for instance, and this is a whole nother issue, but it's directly relevant, right? The federal government sets immigration policy. The 10th Amendment basically says the states don't get to set immigration policy because the federal government's already been designated power by the Constitution. I think what they're going to argue, what the federal government's arguing about on AI is it's a national security issue.
It absolutely is.
And as a national security issue, that falls under the purview of the federal government.
That's right.
I think that's going to be the argument that gets advanced on that. Now,
bottom line, our AI has to be better than every other country's AI.
Right.
Here, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. This is a matter of survival.
And I'm not really convinced the main concern is really, although it's an interesting take of California going to do something wonky with AI, like put DEI stuff in.
Yeah.
I think the bigger concern is that the federal government might be better positioned to understand what malicious foreign actors are doing and be able to devise policy to secure American AI systems. I think that's really the bigger concern.
Yeah, and especially at the infancy of these AIs, you just think if the government had a way of maybe tagging those codes and being able to track a genealogy of when people take those open source models and make it their own, maybe a way to track it even. Who knows?
Yeah, it's
better to be in control of it from the start, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this is a proactive position. We are going to have to see how it plays out in courts. Although I did want to point out one very interesting thing. We spend 2 or 3 minutes now talking about AI and its various.
Always. I always find a way to do that. I'm sorry. I'm convinced they're going to parachute in the dead of night.
But not once have we talked about this in terms of dollar amounts. We're talking about a budgeting bill.
Yeah.
This gets back to one of the interesting points that's going on with these continuing resolutions, right? Here you have a whole major policy worthy of discussion that's stuck into the middle of a 2,000-page bill that's also covering how much toilet paper the federal government's going to buy to the next year. I mean, seriously, this is really a poor reflection on where governmental debate, I think, sometimes has sunk.
Maybe, political strategy isn't my top game, but I do see there's a huge rush. And particularly looking at the midterms with the disruption with the tariffs and the stock markets, people are scared and they're a little bit rattled. I think Trump knows they need to start seeing some returns to feel confident. And that really has to come in way before the midterms.
Right.
So I think he's just seeing that there's just a pressure and a deadline to perform immediately.
Well, I don't disagree with that at all, but that doesn't explain why they've relied on continuing resolutions increasing over the last 40 years.
And that is a funny thing. You're waiting to pass the budget because you want to see who's going to be in office. That it shouldn't work like that.
I mean, realistically, in an ideal world, this budget should have been passed last fall before the election. And what should have been going on now is the opening debates for next year's budget, which is going to be due into September, supposedly, right? Federal fiscal year starts October 1st.
You mean prepare our budget before it becomes a crisis?
Well, yeah.
What?
And that's what we've gotten away from. And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but some public remarks that our representative up here, Mark Gamaday, has made. I remember one pronounced meeting over in your neck of the woods at Winnemucca that was very tense for everybody involved. But Mark made a very good point. That's ultimately what we need to get back to, is where we have budget debates that are actually about the budget, that are actually about how we're spending money, what's our long-term goal. And, that's really where we should be. And just doing stuff like keep pushing through these continuing resolutions, or what a lot of people who were trying to argue with Mark wanted to do is just shut down the government until the Democrats capitulate, isn't going to do that. Right. I think we do have a structural and a procedural process.
Yeah. And going back to those bond markets, that is your baseline market. Stuff like that can make your markets very shaky. It's very irresponsible. I was going to say, this is the behavior of a toddler. But okay. Resolutions aside, I did want to touch also on immigration because we have $46.5 billion in this big, beautiful bill to try to take care of our southern border. And hopefully we might actually get it done by the end of Trump's term. So $6.5 million a mile, 1,000 miles, that's $6.5 billion. And the other 40, did you know that ICE hasn't gotten an increase in their budget in 20 years? It is the only government agency that hasn't got a year-over-year increase. So
it's interesting, yeah.
The rest of that money is put towards ICE to be able to do its jobs. We got a lot more flights going to have to go out. We need a lot more detention facilities. We need a lot more personnel. We need security cameras on the border, yada, yada, yada. So we're going to deck out that border and seal it off, hopefully, by the end of this administration. If it doesn't get done by the end of this administration, I'm going to go down there and finish it myself. This cannot happen again. If there's a Democrat that comes in and sells off excess border materials again, I'm going to lose my mind.
Well, and that's a whole nother ball of wax. But again, I think it really does get back to one of the reasons it's been stuck is that we haven't had any foreign motion on immigration policy.
Yeah.
Now for 20 years.
Yep.
Right. Really since the first Obama administration.
Yeah. Hard not to believe that's not on purpose. I know I'm the cynical one, but that just seems like, if you really want to fix something, you can fix it. It doesn't seem like they want to fix it.
Well, and it seems like neither side really wants to fix it. I think that's the bigger issue. And again, I find myself more and more arguing or feeling that it's a procedural process, that there's a desire on both sides not to actually undergo, I think, the compromise and debate functions of the Constitution that are really designed to air this stuff out, to slow this stuff down.
Yeah.
And say, wait a minute, okay, what's the best policy? Yeah. And I think the end result of that is you get a situation that just becomes so out of control that either you have to go and runs around Congress, which is executive orders, or you have something like DOJ, right? That you have to go in there and try to just, create a fire break, as it were, to stop everything. I think Doge is still going to give us a lot of dividends, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to cut the 1.5 trillion overnight. Well, I think that was unrealistic expectation.
Always. And business, we're a little bit more aware of this than the common person. I'm always shocked at how people freak out when they fail, because it's just like, that's part of the process of getting to the right answer. What's heartening to me is that we're trying different things, right? And so you try different things until you find the right answers. And maybe Doge, I would consider Doge a failure, but we learned so much. We learned exactly what needs to be done. We brought focus to it. It's on top of mind. These are all things that were accomplishments.
Right.
So from that perspective, it's not a complete failure, but we have to go through these things to learn these things.
Well, let's take one part, because I sort of disagree, because I actually think what they discovered in the Social Security database is actually huge.
Oh, no, I am sorry. You're right. No, the efficiency stuff, the successes with Doge, I guess the cuts were the unsuccessful.
Well, but again, part of the problem with the cuts is they've already been, as part of the continuing resolutions, put in. That's what the early strand of lawsuits were, and where we're still acting on the empowerment power of the presidency. And I still hold it's going to be divided. I think that defense-related stuff, they're going to say the president, because constitutionally that's his primary job. He can impound those funds, but maybe not, PBS or something like that, right?
Well, I'm worried about the precedent it might set for the future.
Well, that's also true. But what I'm talking about is let's take the USAID program, right? One of the things, whether you think the Sesame Street in Iraq is fraud or waste, right? And we disagree on that.
I think it's both.
Tend to lend, I would say, more to the fraud side than I do, who think it's
fraud and waste. I'm telling you,
it might be waste now. Now, that being said, the point is that has gone on because our budget process was built around continuing resolutions, and that's on page 1,398 of a bill you're trying to get through 19 hours before you have to vote on it.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas in the traditional way, that would have been part of the bill, that would have foreign affairs or whatever one of those 12 bills would have been on, that would have spent a month or so moving through Congress, where people can actually look at the details and have an open debate about that. That is a much, much better way to actually run a country. Right. And I have some faith. Hopefully it's not misplaced, but I have some faith that that's where I think we have a lot of senior Republican congressmen that are really starting to push us back in that direction.
Yeah.
Right.
I hope we get there, but I see the continuing resolutions. What I think both sides have discovered is it's an awesome negotiating kind of roller derby. And you can slam things in that if they had time to look at close enough, you would never get in. But there are those projects. Every senator, every representative has somebody in their district with some on-ball project that he's really good friends with, and he'd really like to see it happen. Like during those fast continuing resolution pieces, that's one of those times when you just slam one of those weird projects in. And you're right, it's a really inefficient way to do government, but I do think it's on purpose.
Well, I do think, I'm not doubting that.
But I love that this bill makes sure that process doesn't happen for the foreseeable future. So that really is huge strategically.
If they follow up.
If they follow up.
And this is
asterisks.
Yeah. And I think this is something that July 4th deadline is very interesting about.
What a win that would be, though, to get it done by July 4th.
Well, if they get it done by July 4th, and I think you would prefer it earlier, but what it does, July 4th, they could take their vacations, come back in August with basically the decks have been cleared. Right. We're going to start this process anew and do it right and actually look through this stuff. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot more of the Doge-inspired cuts is on the next budget, where they actually can 100% control it at the congressional level. There's no empowerment issues. Right. Yeah.
And I think once we cross that finish line, I think people are going to be very excited about President Trump, because his style is very scary at first. No one, not even the establishment, knew what to do. So us poor lay people are like, oh God, I hope we survive. But as he funnels in this strategy, I think you're starting to see it take shape, that this thing could really cinch into an incredible new next 20, 40 years of our economy.
Right.
So I'm very excited about it. And I'm very excited for Nevada, because I think no tax on tips is going to win us over Clark County.
Well, because
we need more Republicans in the Nevada legislature. Maybe this will do it.
Yeah. Maybe. So one can hope.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of stuff to watch. We'll have to watch how that no tax on tips develops. Right.
So cool. We elected a president from outside the establishment.
Right.
Sometimes I got to remind myself that. I'm like, we actually did it as a country.
Right. And, it's going to be, we'll have to see what the long-term consequences of that, and hopefully, and I expect them to be more positive than negative. But
Well, we couldn't stay the course. That wasn't an option.
Good point.
So we tried something new. Again, we got to try something new. We did. I'm so proud of this country.
So we're talking about Doge.
Yeah.
What's your take on the Trump thing?
We spent the first 100 days of the Trump administration going through Doge and that whole bull in a China shop thing and scaring everybody. And now we have this feud between Elon Musk and Trump. And I'm having a hard time really buying into it. And I know that's a chatter among many people are speculating if this is staged, if it's real. A lot of people are convinced it's real, but the more I look at it, the more I just don't see where the outrage comes from. So first things first, Elon being upset about the EV tax credit being eliminated, that I don't buy for a minute because Tesla's already gained the entire market share that it's going to get. And all of his competitors are coming online right now. So if Tesla were to lobby the federal government for a favor right now, it would be to eliminate the EV tax credit. And that's only the beginning of where I'm like, I don't buy it. I think they're still good friends in the end.
Yeah, well, it came out. And of course, one of our Nevada state legislatures, Danielle Gallant, who is down in the Vegas area, Assembly District 23. She does a lot of these little Facebook shorts. And the one she put out yesterday or today actually was talking about Elon Musk and Trump's battle almost being like 14-year-old girls, mean girls going at each other for mindless stuff. I actually think there is some embitterment on Musk's side. I don't think it's so much about financial stuff, the damage done to Tesla. I think it has a lot more to do that. I think Musk got into government and not realizing the real restrictions of what he was going to be able to do. I mean, it's frustrating. And we've seen a lot of people here that don't realize that, one of the biggest problems with any type of government is understanding what you're actually capable of doing and what you're not.
Yeah.
Now, apparently, there's also some reports that JD Vance had a long talk with Musk and said, you can't talk to a president like this. But whatever this is, it just needs to stop. It's not helping anybody. And I think that's where we saw Musk back up. But it is interesting because I don't think this means Doge failed.
No, this isn't. I mean, you could really separate the two things because to me, I see two very accomplished business people and the idea that they would get to an emotional point where they would have a spat in public. These are two people that are genius marketers. So I don't know, but I would say there's a larger conversation to be had. What we saw in this last election cycle was astonishing to me as a business person. I saw so many business people jump into politics, and we all know that you don't jump into politics because what happens is you lose half of your consumers.
Right.
It's not worth it, not in any way, shape, or form. And I was aghast watching brand after brand place a chip on either side, the Democratic or the Republican Party. And what I think is Elon has lost a lot of market share. He's lost a lot of value because of his political foray. And at the end of the day, he was trying to do something good and trying to help Trump. And I really think this is their way of trying to win back the other half of his consumership because he has to sell his products to both sides. And it can't be the case that he spent 100 days of service to the federal government and that's the end of his career. That cannot be the case.
Right.
And I think a fight with Trump would win back some liberals.
Well, or
at least stop Tesla dealerships from being burnt down.
Well, yeah, it might do that, which really says something about the, perceived economic value sometimes in the economy. It was an interesting sideshow, but I think whatever the cause and whatever really went on, I think that was it, a sideshow. But it happening right in the middle of this budget battle, it's just part of the mess.
Yeah.
Okay. So once again, we'll be following up on this as this progresses. But if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and shoot us an email at info@775alive.com. Until then, I'm Scott Gaborski.
And I'm Crystal Newton.
We'll see you around the 775.